Hello again, everybody. It's Jay with what is definitely not a low-effort filler video. This time I am going to be talking about another movie, this time Sonic 2. So I've mentioned before that I enjoy the Sonic series, unfortunately pigeonholing myself into being the Sonic guy on the channel, which does me no favors considering I have a cartoon bird person for my avatar, but nonetheless. So I mentioned it once or twice before. I did go see the first movie when it came out, and it was fine. It's just okay. It was a decent, goofy little family adventure comedy that just so happened to have a character named Sonic the Hedgehog in it. It didn't have anything to do with the games or any real similarity beyond that, but it was fine. So when the second movie comes out, they announce it basically like a week after the first one. I'm like, all right, this is probably not going to be very good either, but we'll wait and see. And after all the previews and everything, I'm like, okay, this seems like it's going to be decent. So, not necessarily on a whim, I did decide I was going to go see this when they announced it, just to see if they improved on anything. And for the most part, I think they did. So, the quick rundown, if you have, I mean, the trailers basically give away everything, like they always do. The quick rundown is, it's like a year later, at the end of the first movie, Robotnik gets zapped off into space, and obviously now he's back. The whole setup, which I was actually kind of surprised. The whole setup is really quick, actually. So everything kind of sets up in the plot's moving in motion like 10 minutes in. Like, you have the whole setup with the human characters where they're going on vacation or whatever to some fucking wedding to the annoying sister character from the first movie that was obnoxious and everybody hated. So James Marsden, Jason Cyclops, and his wife fuck off to Hawaii, and Sonic's just kind of hanging out alone after learning an important lesson about not being a shitty superhero. In a kind of fun opening sequence where he's running around stopping a bank robbery. Would have been fun if it weren't for the fact that there's this annoying hostage in, because if you've seen the trailer, it's Sonic running around in like an armored van, running away from the cops trying to stop it. And the fucking driver of the van is there with him, and he's constantly just pissing and moaning and making lame cracks about it. He's like, oh, you're a terrible superhero, blah, blah, blah. It's like, he says it again and again. It's just kind of annoying. It would have been a really fun sequence if the guy just shut the fuck up, basically, or at least wasn't making crappy jokes. So Sonic's stuck at home, and they go fuck off to Hawaii, and then basically immediately Robotnik shows up again, busting down his door. And of course he's palling around with his new friend Knuckles. And this is when the plot pretty much starts, is when Knuckles is after Sonic because he believes he's the key to finding the Master Emerald, which I was actually kind of surprised about. That's how they introduced it, is that the whole setup for Robotnik teaming up with Knuckles, unlike in the game where he's trying to trick him into thinking Sonic is evil. No, he's pretty much just there because Knuckles already wants to murder Sonic, and Robotnik just kind of tags along. He doesn't find out about the Master Emerald until we, the audience, do, which was kind of surprising. But yeah, Robotnik's back, Knuckles is introduced, and then Tails gets introduced, like, within the first 10 minutes of the movie, and then from there, it's pretty much all plot. Which I was kind of surprised about. I mean, I anticipated that for the most part, but I was kind of surprised that they actually did have it like that. Then from there, I was kind of expecting it to be like a around the world kind of trip movie, and it's a little bit that, but it's kind of condensed. They only really ever go to one place, that's Siberia, which you saw in the trailers and previews and everything. And so from there, it's basically them trying to find the Master Emerald. Which is a fine enough little plot. I think it works for what it is. In terms of the cast, just going from the top, Sonic is definitely better than he was in the first movie, but not by a whole big margin. I was just never been a big fan of Ben Schwartz as a voice actor just in general, because like, he can only really do one voice, and that's his voice. He plays kind of the same characters every time, and I mean, you know what? That's a workable niche. A lot of people can land those roles and be set for life, and he's managed to find it, but it doesn't really work for Sonic as a character. It worked more in the first movie because that was kind of the character he played, even though that wasn't really the actual character. But they do start to try to change him around. Like the big plot arc for him in this movie is trying to grow up. Essentially, it's kind of a not necessarily coming of age, but it's more learning. They don't outright do the great power comes great responsibility line, but they have a very similar line, and that's kind of the whole plot arc is Sonic trying to learn to not be such an obnoxious little kid and actually become a responsible person, responsible hero. So he's a little bit better in this movie, but it's not by a significant margin because a lot of the same jokes and same personality styles have stuck from the first movie. More so near the end, he starts to grow out of it and becomes a little more accurate to how he is in the games and the comics and everything, but it's still kind of a far cry. It's better, but it's not perfect. Jim Carrey, once again, as Robotnik, steals the show. Less so than in the first movie, where he was basically carrying 90% of the movie by himself. Here, he's definitely balanced out more because you have the game characters to play off of, and the plot definitely works with all the game-related characters better and utilizes them better to fill out the movie. In terms of the character, he's definitely started, again, shifting closer to the game counterpart, where he's more openly psychotic and more openly evil, just kind of despicable like he is in the games. Because in the first movie, Robotnik he's kind of a good guy. He's kind of like a crazy asshole, but he's still technically like a good guy up until the very end when he goes full mask off and he starts trying to kill everybody. You know, there's that kind of implication that he's already planning on taking over the world. But here in the second one, he's gone completely psycho. He's just totally 100% evil now, no redeemable qualities at all. And Carey doesn't change anything about his portrayal or how he does anything. He's basically identical in terms of performance, but he works much better here, mostly because the script accounts for Jim Carrey being in the role and gives him more material to work with. Because I think a lot of in the first movie, I don't know if they necessarily planned to have Jim Carrey as Robotnik, but the script kind of doesn't really give him a whole lot to work with, and a lot of it is just kind of Carrey going off on his own with the script and kind of hamming it up. But here the script gives him more opportunities to ham it up, and in that regard, I actually really enjoy him more in this one. I mean, he was honestly the best part of the first movie, but here he's definitely recognizable as being Dr. Robotnik. A lot of his jokes don't necessarily land. A lot of them aren't particularly funny, but again, it's Jim Carrey's performance that makes them work. So I think that element is pretty well done. And then in terms of the two new characters, you have Tails, who very surprising that they kept Colleen O'Shaughnessy from the games, because they had her as Tails in the little teaser at the end of the first movie. And I'm surprised that they didn't replace her or just put in a new voice actor instead, which I liked. I actually thought Tails was pretty good in this movie. He's a little closer to how he was in like early adventure and kind of the late 90s, early 2000s stuff, where nowadays he's kind of been, not necessarily like flanderized, but he's kind of been reduced down to just being like Sonic's sidekick, where he's the tech guy and he's like a big coward and that's about it. He's got more of a personality. He's definitely kind of akin to that, where he's more the tech guy and he's kind of a little bit of a cowardly guy, but they make it work with his character and the backstory they give him. So his whole setup in the movie is that he knows about Sonic because basically everybody already knows who Sonic is, kind of, somehow. It's not exactly clear. A lot of the setup from like the first movie with like Sonic being special and people hunting him and all that and going into hiding is never really particularly elaborated on. They elaborated on it more because of its connection to the Master Emerald, but that seems more like a course correction kind of thing, and I don't think they necessarily were planning on doing that. So Tails somehow already knows about Sonic, and him going after Sonic was because he found out Knuckles is after him and trying to kill him, so he traveled to Earth to find Sonic and rescue him from Knuckles and keep him safe. Basically just kind of on his own whim. He's not really has any good motive other than Sonic is important and he's special and I like him. but they give him a good reason for the hero worship. They have a lot of they try to make them similar in a way where Tails, obviously he has the two tails, so Tails has been shunned and he's kind of like a shut-in with no friends, and he saw Sonic as like a kindred spirit because Sonic is also a freak with no friends and that everybody's kind of afraid of, so he kind of idolized him, and that's kind of why he's driving to go help Sonic, and I like that. That's a good setup for him doing the whole hero worship sidekick thing. And he's not like a sidekick. He's definitely treated as his own standalone character with his own kind of agency, and he's not just Sonic's friend. He's not just his tag along. And I like that he's actually allowed to do stuff. That he's allowed to be his own character. He's definitely more mature than he usually is depicted these days, which I thought was a neat idea. They don't really say how old he is. Usually, like he's like half of Sonic's age, but here, in terms of just general appearance and personality, he seems to be about the same age as Sonic, but they never really address it. He's still kind of that whole little brother vibe to Sonic, but I think it's not just his entire personality. He's actually allowed to do things. He actually has his own kind of personality, which I enjoyed. And he has a little bit of a character arc with him trying to not necessarily be as much of a coward. Like, he joins in the big fight at the end, and he's actually like fighting Robotnik rather than sitting on the sidelines or doing anything like that, which I liked. That was a nice thing to cap off with him. And then, of course, we have everybody's favorite meme machine, Knuckles, who just immediately off the top of my head, Idris Elba was a very bold casting choice. I think he works for the most part with the way the script writes him. There's a couple of points where he's not particularly great, but I think he makes this version of Knuckles work. He definitely wasn't a bad pick, but not my first pick, admittedly. So Knuckles in this movie he's not particularly close to the games. More so, he's kind of like an amalgamation of different versions. So like I said, and the setup is that he wants to kill Sonic because he believes he's connected to the Master Emerald, which turns out to be true. And how he already knows who Sonic is, how he knows all of this stuff is never really elaborated on. Why Knuckles also has powers like Sonic is also never elaborated on. I was surprised that they remembered that Knuckles used to have super speed like Sonic did in the games, which was a weird thing to see, definitely. Knuckles was fine for the script and the way they did him, but he's not that close to Knuckles, at least from my memory of how he was in like the earlier stuff. He's definitely different than modern day Knuckles, which is, I'm sure Knuckles fans are going to be happy about that. I've never been particularly a big fan of Knuckles, admittedly. So they play up it feels like they had an idea of who Knuckles was as a character, but didn't exactly fully elaborate on it, where they have the ideas of like, oh yeah, he's the last of his kind, he's like this asshole warrior, and he's kind of a dimwit. They have those kind of general ideas, and I want to say crowbar him in, but they don't really necessarily flesh any particular avenue out. He's got that stoic, honorable warrior, Klingon type personality, and I will say I appreciated that the movie treated him seriously. He's a serious character. He's presented as a serious threat. He's not treated as a joke inherently. There are jokes made about Knuckles and jokes involving Knuckles, but Knuckles himself is a serious character who doesn't make any jokes. Most of the humor derived from him is just kind of the overall fish out of water, stuck-up warrior asshole guy who doesn't, he's been alone most of his life, much like Sonic, and again, there's that parallels with him and Tails too. So he has that, stone-faced warrior personality, and he doesn't really understand much of anything beyond fighting necessarily, so there's a lot of jokes made about Knuckles kind of being a dimwit, and most of the humor involving him is just kind of him being weird and out of touch, and they don't like again, they don't have Knuckles making jokes, and they don't directly make jokes about Knuckles, but most of the humor involving him as a character is just him being kind of stupid and being like a weird, out of touch warrior child, which is a fun angle. And they tie that in well with the origin of the emeralds and his connection with Sonic and the echidnas and all that they had in the beginning of the first movie. So I did enjoy Knuckles in this movie, but I wouldn't exactly say he's particularly accurate to any particular version of Knuckles. So some people might not necessarily enjoy him, but I think I would. So I think it depends on how much of a fan you are of Knuckles as a character. And from here, I'm going to kind of go over the general plot of the movie. So I'm going to put up a little bit of a spoiler tag here you can skip through. So if you plan on seeing the movie and don't want to basically hear a quick recap of everything that happens, you can skip ahead. So, like I said, the general plot involves finding the Master Emerald, and it's a relatively quick search where the little dimensional map from the first movie comes back, and of course that already had the Master Emerald on it in the first one, so that's immediately tied in. They do the fucking Star Wars hologram speech with the bird lady from the first movie, who basically is just like, "Oh, Sonic, blah blah blah, you're my only hope, and now you have to find the Master Emerald before the echidnas do, or whatever, blah blah blah." It's like it's a quick exposition dump there. So by kind of convenience, I don't even remember how they figured out it was in Siberia, to be entirely honest. They just kind of figure out that it's in Siberia. So they go there, and that's where all the snowy stuff happens in the movie. And this is the first, like, really bad scene where they end up in, like, this weird tavern in the middle of nowhere, Siberia. And you saw it in the trailer where it's like, oh, they're in the thing, where, they're in the snow gear, and everybody's kind of all creepy and scary. And there's some fun gags there, like where they do the obligatory gag where they pan over everybody being really grim and, like, scary, and then you have the one quick shot of it. It's like, oh, it's somebody who's just kind of relatively, like, peaceful and normal, but then turns out, oh no, they're actually evil too. Or it's like there's some old lady there sitting knitting, and she's knitting the skull and crossbones and like a scarf. It's like, okay, that was kind of expected but cute. So you get a little bit of exposition here, mostly just setting up Tails and his backstory, but this is really the first bad scene, and I think one of the biggest issues I have with this movie is just the human stuff is just garbage, more so than it was in the first movie. So, because of shenanigans, Tails has a little universal translator that probably uses fucking Babelfish or whatever, because it's entirely useless, and they have the obligatory moment where they say something wrong by accident, and they get everybody pissed off at them, which leads to Tails conveniently finding out about a Siberian custom, which probably doesn't exist, where they challenge a guy to a fucking dance battle in the middle of nowhere, Siberia, in order to not die. And it's exactly as obnoxious and way too long as you would expect it to be. So there's one fun gag with the dance battles that the guy that they end up challenging walks up, and he's in, like, this kind of generic, it's like a red suede jacket with his name or something on it. He's like that kind of generic gangster look. Then he takes his jacket off, and the guy has a tattoo of himself on his chest, which I thought was a clever gag. But the fucking dance battle goes on for, like, I think, like, 5 minutes, probably straight, where you've got them dancing to some generic Eastern European music, and of course Sonic and Tails don't know how to dance to it. I don't know why they're... This is kind of one of the weird moments too, where they don't know how to dance to the music, but then they put on a different song and suddenly they can dance again. And they play Uptown Funk in its entirety as Sonic and Tails dance, and they get, like, a light show, and Tails somehow has the ability to make fucking shadow clones of himself, so they spawn a bunch of background dancers of Tails, which is... It's so lame. It's lame. Like, at least they picked a good song. Like, they could have picked fucking any song, and at least they picked a decent song. Which I think is one of the things I do enjoy about this movie, is that it has a really good soundtrack when it comes to like, orchestral OST kind of stuff, where they use licensed songs, which I'll touch upon closer to the end when I'm done talking about the plot. So that's kind of a really big eye-rolling scene, and it goes on for far, far longer than it had any right to be. I think there's some fun bits where they're dancing. I liked when they're trying to do like the Russian kicky dance, earlier there. That's kind of cute. And there's a part during the big finale where Sonic does the SA1 pose from the cover of the game, which is it was cute. It was cute. They didn't really focus on it too much. It was kind of a quick thing. I mean, there was it was right there, center of the frame, but they didn't like pause and hold on it. It's like remember this kind of thing, which that I think I was fine with. So from there, they find some ancient temple where a key to it was like a compass or something to find where the Master Emerald is hidden is. And this is where we get the big exposition dump, and this is kind of the one reason why I wanted to talk about this, because, of course, our friendly neighborhood Ken Penders found out about the scene and has been seething about it on Twitter for like 3 days straight now. Because, of course, his whole thing is, oh, they stole my ideas, they stole Enerjack. That was his big thing, is that he was claiming that the movie stole Enerjack from the comics. And I'm not going to explain who Enerjack is, because that's going to take too long. So if you don't know who he is, just go fucking look it up on the Sonic Wiki or whatever. But that's kind of why I was like, okay, I want to see where this goes, because I wanted to see how accurate it is. So they explain the kind of origin, the backstory of the Master Emerald and where it came from and why it's such a big deal. I mean, obviously, if you know anything about Sonic, you know why it's a big deal. But if you're like a normie, you're not gonna know. So the origin here is a lot of this is actually kind of similar to the comic, which is like more so than I was expecting. So the origin of the Master Emerald is that the Chaos Emeralds already existed. They don't really elaborate on what the Chaos Emeralds are or where they came from or anything like that. So in this movie, the 7 emeralds were combined to create the Master Emerald by the Echidnas, because the Echidnas are a bunch of sociopaths, as they always are, who used it to create an ultimate super weapon, basically, because using the Master Emerald basically turns you into a god. You have full control over reality, time, and space. You are basically invincible. And this is where I was like, okay, yeah, I see where Penders is complaining, because the way they depict it and the way they kind of explain how using the Emerald power works is it's kind of just Enerjack, where you're a glowing green god of reality and creation, and you're basically invincible, but you're also a complete sociopath when you use the power, which is more so a testament to how horribly generic Pender's ideas were, rather than them directly lifting anything from the comic intentionally. But I can kind of see where he was coming from. So the whole setup is that there was this race of owl people, which is the owl chick from the first movie, who stole the emerald from the Echidnas and hid it, because obviously a reality-destroying super weapon is a bad thing to have, especially in the hands of a bunch of sociopaths like the Echidnas, as we have discussed. So they ended up hiding it on Earth. Why it was chosen as Earth is never really given any good explanation. It's mostly just out of convenience factor. Which is, again, it's not super surprising. It's kind of expected that it would end up being Earth just for ease of the plot. And the whole backstory scene is actually really well animated. They switched to a 2D, really like I don't know what the right word for do. It's a very chaotic, very loose style with a lot of very heavy black inking work, and it's there's a couple of things it reminds me of, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. I think the sequence was directed by Tyson Hesse, because it's very reminiscent of his artwork, but I couldn't say for sure. I didn't really pay attention to any parts of the credits to see. Because I know he's still working on this movie like he was the first one, so I would assume it was his, because it looked like his work, but I couldn't say for sure. And I liked the look of the whole little emerald temple and everything like that, or the compass temple, I guess, necessarily. It was fun. And that segues into a part where, of course, Robotnik and Knuckles were just following them. So everything fucking blows up, and Sonic and Tails jump off and ride down the mountain. And this is where they, again, if you've seen the trailer, you've seen the scene where they kind of combined the snowboard scene from Ice Cap Zone in SA1 and the helicopter chase down in City Escape from SA2, where Sonic tears a bunch of metal off of one of Robotnik's robots and uses it to snowboard down the mountain, which is it's a fun sequence. I enjoyed it, and of course you have Knuckles following him too, which was kind of cute. The whole sequence was a little too. And a big thing I had with this movie is a lot of the action is a little too. This is going to be a really weird thing to say. It's a little too fast. Not necessarily the way of like everything's moving too fast, but it's like nothing really. You can't really focus on it too much, and there's not a whole lot of steady moments where there's a lot of everything's kind of moving around, and not necessarily in like a fun way where it would be Sonic. But this scene especially is not particularly great. There's a later scene that's a little better, but everything's kind of very fast moving and more to the detriment of the plot rather than for any enhanced benefit. So around this point also we get an extended sequence where we learn Knuckles' backstory and about because they of course make him the last of the echidnas again because they conveniently every other echidna just fucking died off screen basically. It's implied but not outright said that the remaining echidnas were the ones that we saw in the first movie, like they were the very last of them. So it's implied that they all got murdered by the owl chick, whose name I forget, which is surprisingly brutal. They also don't really explain whether or not she's dead or not. It's kind of implied that she's also dead. But we have this moment where Knuckles kind of recaps his backstory to Sonic after the snowboard scene. And he talks about how all of his family went off to go die, and he wanted to join them in glorious combat, and his dad. And I'm surprised that we even had mentioned that Knuckles has parents, because that's kind of verboten these days with Sega, is mentioning characters having parents for reasons. But I liked it. I liked the design for the echidnas. They kind of escaped that usual problem that the Sonic media has, both the games and the comics, where any other echidnas are basically just Knuckles again, and they all look distinct enough. They all have enough differences in terms of their general physical appearance and designs that they all look distinguishable. Granted, they're only on screen for a couple of seconds, admittedly, but Knuckles' dad too looked pretty good. He doesn't look just like Knuckles. He's not just a reskin of Knuckles. There's at least some variance with his design, which I liked. And another thing, too, is that they don't explain why Knuckles has powers much like Sonic does. That's just kind of like, it's brought up earlier in the movie and then never elaborated on. There's kind of an implied destiny thing with kind of like how Sonic had in the first movie. And I like those parallels they have with him and Knuckles. They kind of set up we're more in common than we would think. And due to misunderstandings, Knuckles assumes that it's a ploy, and that kind of leads to them continuing their rivalry throughout the movie. But I liked that. I did really like exploring that angle to him, and I liked how they incorporated it into the plot, because that's around the time when he starts to realize that maybe Robotnik's not up on the up and up, because he's kind of crazy and Sonic's not actually a bad guy. So following up from this scene, though, because we have to segue the plot in a way that makes sense, we unfortunately get to the single worst part of the movie, where, as I mentioned, what was his name? Tom or something? Cyclops' character. Him and the wife fuck off to Hawaii because the fucking obnoxious sister from the first movie is getting married to some guy, and they're there for the wedding, and they keep cutting back every now and then to there and them hanging out, and it's fucking obnoxious every time. Every time they cut back, the scenes are way too long. The characters just aren't interesting at all. Like, the main dude, Cyclops, he's fine. He's very much the same kind of character that he was in the first movie, but he doesn't really have any reason to be here. Because in the first movie he worked because he was, of course, playing off of Sonic, and he's the straight man. He's the role model character. And there he worked, but in this one, because he's not hanging out with Sonic or anything, he's just annoying, and he doesn't really have any reason to be around or do anything. And all of the jokes in the scenes are lame. They go on for too long, and I don't care about any of the characters. And they're relatively few and far between, admittedly, but every time they cut back to any of the human characters, They're just obnoxious in this movie. Way, way worse than in the first one. So they end up in Hawaii because they gave Tom one of the warp rings. And of course, there's this really obnoxious, long, unfunny sequence where, due to shenanigans, he ended up swapping one of the real wedding rings with one of the warp rings. And of course, he's up there interrupting the wedding and all that. And you get all this fucking obnoxious jokes and everything. So, by the power of plot convenience, Sonic and Tails end up in Hawaii. And by the sheer unimaginable power of plot convenience, it turns out that the entire wedding, from beginning to end, and everything involved, was an elaborate ploy by the government to capture Cyclops and Sonic. As we find out, this is the new formation of everybody's favorite G-Man assholes, Gun, which I was kind of surprised that they actually mentioned the full name of Gun, Guardian Units of Nations. They don't really say the full name anymore. They usually just stick with Gun. And there's a quick joke where they make fun of the acronym being Gun. I was like, yeah, okay, that's like a one-off gag. That's kind of fun. They don't harp on it or anything. It's just like, it's a quick thing where he says the full name, and the obnoxious sister character's like, really Gun? He's like, yeah, it's Gun. It's cool, whatever. And that's they just go from there. And the fucking Olive Garden guy from the first movie comes back, and he's the leader of Gun. I actually had to make sure to stick around and make sure, but no, he's not supposed to be Tower from the games, which I'm fucking glad about, because that means that we can get a better human character in the movies. Not that Tower's a particularly great character, admittedly. So the whole thing ended up being an elaborate ploy to lure in Tom, that's his name, fuck. Tom and Sonic for reasons. You know, it's not like they didn't know where they fucking lived, so the entire thing seemed kind of pointless. And this is so annoying, too, because Tom, Sonic, and Tails get kidnapped, and so we're stuck with the wife and the obnoxious sister for like 20 fucking minutes straight of them just dicking around trying to rescue them, and it's so annoying. It is genuinely the worst part of the movie. I got so fucking bored. I started just looking at my phone. I could not keep watching. It was so bad. I don't know if this was just like somebody in the cast bitching and moaning for more screen time, or they, for whatever reason, had this left over from the first movie as an idea, or what, but it has no place in this movie. It doesn't have any reason to be here because it goes on for way, way too long. And there's way too much focus on the obnoxious sister character. Like, there's a scene where it's just her, the gun commander, and the fake husband. And it goes on for like 10 fucking minutes straight of her just being obnoxious, sassy black woman character stereotype. It's just obnoxious. She never shuts the fuck up. It has no real reason to be here or connect to anything that happens in the movie. If it was just the wife character, I would have been fine with it because she's at least a decent actress. But God, there's way too much focus on that sister character who has no fucking reason to be here anymore at all. I don't know why they brought her back. I don't know why there's so much focus on her, but it's such a fucking drag. But thankfully, once that scene wraps up, it is pretty much all game kind of stuff, all action from here to the end, and it gets much, much more enjoyable. So it's a very drastic drop in terms of quality, but it shoots right back up again, which is thankfully appreciated despite how obnoxiously long the sequence was. So while all of the obnoxious shit with the wedding and gun was going on, Robotnik and Knuckles found the secret temple of the Master Emerald, and it's it's not particularly referential to any specific level in the game, but a lot of the architecture and a lot of the design elements are lifted from the games. Like, you see the a full like big zoom out of it, and the layout of the outside of the temple is it's basically straight up like a level from the games, because you got all these segmented platforms and kind of like a 2D variety. And you got like a lot of the death traps where Robotnik and Knuckles are running through, and you got like the spike pits, and you got the swinging balls and the flamethrowers and all that stuff. And it's a really exciting sequence too. It's Robotnik. Obviously, Jim Carrey has a lot of good action moments too, where he's doing a lot of fun flips and to run around from all the traps and stuff. It's neat. It's fun to see. There's a little bit of like a couple of different levels from Sonic 3. You got a little bit of like Marble Garden. You got a little bit of a Sky Sanctuary. Some a Hidden Palace. It like I said, it's not particularly borrowed from one specific part. It's kind of more of an amalgamation of different elements. But the aesthetic is there, and that's what I appreciate. It's more Sonic like, which is what the first movie needed, and that's definitely an element there too. So Sonic ends up getting all the way to the secret little island where it's hidden. And there's this fun sequence where he's running across the water at super speed, which is really neat too. That's where if you've seen the trailer, you've already seen the fight where Knuckles and Sonic are fighting over the Master Emerald while Robotnik's doing Robotnik shit, planning on, of course, backstabbing everybody, which he does. And the fight with Sonic and Knuckles is actually really fun. There's the first one they have earlier in the movie at the house, which it's mostly just a beatdown from Knuckles. But here they're actually pretty evenly matched. It's a very exciting sequence, and it's very fast-paced, but unlike a lot of the other action scenes, it's clear enough where you can tell what's going on, and it's not just chaotic action and set pieces and all that. So I liked that. I really liked that fight. It was very enjoyable. And this is where it leads to one of the more surprising elements is that Robotnik basically goes super when he gets the Master Emerald. Like, he turns green and he starts glowing, and he basically becomes a reality warping super god, like mentioned. Which I'm surprised it's taken them this long to have Super Robotnik happen, but it's kind of fun. It's a fun little sequence because they put this voice filter on him, and he's got that kind of voice of the many echo effect to his voice, and he starts going way crazier too, which is fun. It's a fun sequence. Then he teleports himself back to Green Hill, and I forgot to mention it. The sidekick villain from the first movie, the Stone Dude, he's been hanging around. He's had like a coffee shop set up in the town, and he's been secretly building a mini base for Robotnik. So they keep cutting back to and from with him, and he's got the coffee shop decked out in Robotnik shit. And it's kind of like a mini secret lair, which is a fun little thing. And the sidekick dude Stone, he's not in the movie a whole lot. Like, he shows up early on just kind of for additional exposition with Robotnik, and then he's mostly just kind of there on the side for the rest of the movie. They keep cutting back though, and they have this really obnoxious, overly long scene where the deputy cop guy from the first movie, he finds out that Stone is running a secret evil lair in the town, and he holds him at gunpoint, and he's just kind of obnoxious. And again, it goes on for too long, like all of the human stuff in this movie does. But from there, pretty much when Robotnik gets the emerald, it's basically all action from the end, because Gunn showed up waiting for him. So Robotnik uses his powers to basically tear up all of the gun forces in the whole town, and he uses it to build the Death Egg robot, which looks really good in this movie. One of my main issues, again, is that they kind of stick to the boring white drones that Robotnik had for his badniks instead. Like, he has a new one that resembles the Wasp ones, but it's still like boring white clean robots. But I like that they just went full on goofy Eggman shit with the Death Egg robot, and it's pretty 1-to-1 to the games. It's fucking gigantic, and they do a little bit of that like realistic kind of robotic look to it too, which is it's a little less cartoony, but it's still got the big fucking mustache and the giant nose and everything, and it's fun. Robotnik's piloting it by like it's a G Gundam, like he's piloting it by moving, which is a fun little sequence. So he's doing little like dance moves and stuff, just kind of brag. It's very very Robotnik. So that's when Knuckles ends up patching things up with Sonic, and he's like, "Okay, I was kind of a dickhead." They have a little heart to heart, which is fun. So they end up getting back to Green Hill because they stole a plane, which is you saw in the trailer again. And it's a basically all action from here on, where it's them up against the Death Egg, and it's fun. Uh, they have that moment where Sonic kind of finally realizes that what it means to be more mature, what it means to be a hero, where he's like, I'm gonna be the distraction. You guys take out Eggman, and the whole sequence there is fun with them all running around. And you get everybody kind of has their moment where they they kind of complete their arcs. Like Tails actually goes head on against Eggman, which is fun. Knuckles gets his revenge against Eggman, and Sonic has some fun banter. There's a lot of fun moments with him and Robotnik as well. It's hard to describe because it's basically just an action scene, but again, the earlier action scenes are a little too fast and a little too chaotic, but the one in the temple and then this one with the Death Egg robot is much cleaner, despite still being as fast paced. Like everything, you can still tell what's going on. So there's a lot of really fun moments. Everybody gets a good moment or two. But you get that moment where everybody's kind of been beat. Everybody's kind of they managed to get the emerald back from Robotnik, but he's still able to pilot the robot. And then of course you have the big moment that fucking everybody should have seen coming a mile away. The Master Emerald gets knocked away, and actually this is kind of surprising that they don't just do it directly, where Sonic's able to get the Master Emerald, and then Tom and what's her face end up rescuing Sonic from getting pummeled to death. But in a surprising moment, no, the Master Emerald shatters back into the Chaos Emeralds, which was a surprising moment that they didn't just have him use the Master Emerald and then have it break apart afterwards. It feels a little unnecessary, but I think it was mostly just for a visual element with how it goes from there. Because of course you have the oh, why can't I use its power? Oh, why is it not working? Oh, I can't do anything with it. Blah blah. You have that brief moment where the hero's resolve is kind of fallen apart, and he's accepted his defeat. And you got him and the humans, they're hugging, and that's when the Chaos Emeralds activate. And unsurprisingly, as in, there's obviously you should have seen this coming. Sonic goes super, and he ends up defeating the Death Egg robot. I really liked how Super Sonic looked in this movie. It was a very good look. They didn't make it too bright yellow. It's kind of like a darker yellow orange, not quite gold, but it's not like piss yellow like they kind of usually depict Supersonic these days. And I like the effect. He's got the energy field around him that he usually does, and it looks pretty good. It's not distracting. You can still clearly see Sonic through it. They haven't hidden him or anything like that behind it to show like you actually can see what's going on. I also like that Sonic goes full serious mode when he transforms. Like he's not making jokes. He doesn't really say or do anything goofy. He's full on like stone faced serious. Like, okay, I'm pissed. We end this now, which was actually kind of surprising to me. I was kind of surprised that they did that, but I liked it. I really liked the big final fight with Supersonic. He's got this fun moment where he goes super speed and he basically disassembles the Death Egg robot piece by piece. It's this very kind of. Then of course he does you have the obligatory one tiny little hit is the one that makes it all fall apart, and you have Eggman kind of being self-aware. He's like, oh, so that's how it's gonna be, huh? Okay, all right, Dick. I like that. That was a fun little way to end it all. And of course they kind of do the obligatory fake out, which I will admit actually caught me off guard. They do the obligatory fake out where you think that the power of the emeralds has overwhelmed Sonic and then he's going to go evil. I did expect that they were. I honestly thought they were going to do evil Super Sonic for a second, but no, it's just a fake out gag, and he uses it to make the power to make chili dogs before he sends the emeralds off to wherever the fuck they went. It was a fun little gag. It did actually catch me off guard, so I'll give him that. So from there, the movie's pretty much over. They don't really bother wrapping up any of the destruction or the government shit at all. It's just kind of ends from there. Tails and Knuckles are basically adopted by Tom and the wife, much like Sonic is. So they're all hanging out now again at the end. Knuckles is kind of starting to warm up. He's starting to kind of learn more about Earth, and Tails is again he's definitely grown up a little bit too. And I think that's what I like is that Sonic's whole character arc was him trying to grow up, and he's definitely grown up a little bit more from the first movie where he's a dumb, obnoxious kid, and he's still obnoxious and a little dumb, but he's matured a little bit too, which I appreciate. He's a little bit closer to Game Sonic now. Not exactly 100%, but definitely closer than he ended off in the first movie. The Master, they, for whatever particular reason, they bother having Knuckles fix the Master Emerald, even though the Chaos Emeralds are gone. I don't necessarily know what the point of it was, but it's whatever. They actually just don't address that because you see the Chaos Emeralds just kind of fuck off, and you never see them again for the rest of the movie after that. I mean, the movie's basically over, like I said. But you don't see where they went, which is weird, but it's whatever. It's not really... It's obvious sequel hook kind of thing. And it's a nice little moment where Sonic finally has friends that are like him, and that's kind of allows him to mature a little bit and grow up a little more. And I liked that. I liked how everything ended off. Everybody kind of ends off in a good spot, and it's a nice ending. I did enjoy the ending. And of course, you have the obligatory credits teaser, which if you've heard anything regarding the movie, you've probably already seen it and been spoiled by it. But they're skipping right ahead to Adventure 2 because the teaser is Shadow shows up. Which, had I not been spoiled by, I probably would have been a little more excited about. Granted, Metal Bros, we lost again. I can't believe it. It's weird because even though, like, I've said before, Shadow is my favorite of the Sonic cast. I'm kind of disappointed that they're skipping right ahead to that. I kind of hoped that they did at least one more without him before they went ahead to it, because I know he's popular. I know he's the one that, Adventure 2 is the big one that everybody knows. That's the one that gets the most money and everything. So, of course, they're going to do that next. But it's kind of disappointing that they went ahead to it. Still, had I not found out about it before seeing the movie, I probably would have been a little more surprised. It's actually funny, though. I went to go see it, and I'm surprised because I got a late showing just to attempt to avoid screaming children watching this movie like I did with the first one. I mostly avoided screaming children. There was a couple, even though it was like 10:30 at night when I went to go see it. But I'm kind of glad that there was, because at the end of the movie, when the teaser pops up and Shadow pops up, there was a kid in the audience who very loudly screamed in joy when he showed up. And it made me smile. I was like, all right, okay, that was cute. If that were me, I probably would, if I was the same age, I probably would have done the same thing. So you know what? It was cute. It was appreciated. But, yeah, I'm kind of a little disappointed that they're skipping ahead to Adventure 2. At the very least, they could have done Adventure 1 more directly, because they do lift some stuff from Adventure 1 in this. I'm a little disappointed, but I think if they keep it going the way they have, they'll probably be able to do it well. So, overall, I liked this one more than the first movie, but not enough to say it's better. It does a lot of stuff better, but it does a lot of stuff worse. All of the Sonic and gang stuff is way, way better. There's way, way more of it too, because of course they're the main focus of the plot. But there's still too much human stuff, and all of the human stuff is 10 times worse than it was in the first movie. It is absolutely painful to sit through the human gang scenes. I was just miserable every time it cut back to Tom and the fucking family stuff, or you cut back to the fucking goofy cop hanging out with Stone in the fucking town and all that shit. It just went on for too long every single time. And that was also a problem I had, is that a lot of the jokes were good, but they kept them going way too long, and it just kind of ruined them. Like, there's a joke early on where they're monitoring Sonic's conversation with Tom, and you have Knuckles, because he's a dumbass, he's reading out the texts. And while it's got the little dot 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 prompt going up while one of them's typing, you have Knuckles reading out the dot 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 like an asshole, which would have been funny. But then they have him doing it for like 20 seconds straight of just going dot 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 dot. Like, okay, I got it. It was funny. You don't need to keep going. There were a lot of jokes just kept going for way too long. They would have been much better if they were cut shorter. But for the most part, the jokes were better in this movie. They were a little less cheesy than in the first one. Not necessarily by a significant margin. Most of them are still pretty bad, but I think both Ben Schwartz's delivery and Jim Carrey's delivery makes a lot of their jokes better in comparison, just because I think they worked the script around the actors to make the banter work a little better. The movie, again, much like the first one, feels a little, not necessarily dated. It's a lot of the humor and a lot of the references are kind of stuck in like early to mid 90s, late 80s, much like the first movie was. But unlike the first one, which seemed more like seems like a half an idea of a script that's been sitting around since the 90s and half of it's out of touch film writers, it feels a little more deliberate this time, where they're kind of playing up the 90s aesthetic with Sonic, and there's a lot of 90s related jokes and humor, and like the soundtrack is pretty much all, the non OST stuff is all like late 80s, early 90s. Like you got Run DMC shows up. What was the song? There was a song that played during the Obnoxious Sister sequence, but I don't remember what song it was. It was a good song though. It's a song I like. And there's a lot of just like gags that are lifted straight out of like the 80s and 90s. Like you have a fucking Ghostbusters reference. It's like, okay, you have a Sonic rip off the Ferris Bueller pretending to be a sick man, mannequin set up to be a sick kid joke, and they don't do it one to one, admittedly, but I think it was a fun little gag that they did that. Another gag that went on way too long, though, admittedly. But there are a lot of like really weird kind of dated references that fit the aesthetic of the 90s but still kind of seem weird in like a modern aesthetic. Like one I remembered off the top of my head, Robotnik makes a fucking Limp Bizkit reference at one point. He's like, I forget exactly what the context. I think it was when they find the emerald and he's about to backstab Knuckles, he says Knuckles is about as useful as a backstage pass to Limp Bizkit, which caught me off guard because like I'm surprised Robotnik even knows what fucking Limp Bizkit is. But yeah, there's a lot of that in the movie, more so than it was in the first one, but it feels a little more deliberate this time. The product placement is also far, far less than it was in the first movie, where you had all those obnoxious scenes where it's like, oh hey, here's Nike, here's Zillow, here's Olive Garden. There's none of that, really. You get a little bit of it early on where they end up at the hotel in Hawaii, and they keep mentioning that it's the Four Seasons. But I think that was less like, this is product placement and more, we are at a fancy hotel in Hawaii. I mean, obviously, because they keep mentioning that it's the Four Seasons, it's obviously product placement, but it's worked in a little better. And they bring back the Olive Garden gag, but here it's more just like, oh, you're the Olive Garden guy again. And they make a joke about him being the Olive Garden guy because they don't know his name. And that's it. They don't have them, like, read out the fucking tagline of the restaurant or anything like that. It's just like a one-off thing where they reference him as being the Olive Garden guy. So it's a little better than it was in the first movie. There's not a whole lot of obnoxious product placement stuff like that. The soundtrack's fine. Again, other than the licensed songs they used. I wish there was more incorporation of like game related music. Like in the first movie they had a little bit of it. Like Robotnik's theme had a little bit of the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog Robotnik theme. You had a little bit of like music kind of lifted from the games a little bit, but here they don't really do any of that, and I was a little disappointed because there's a lot of other moments where you could have easily just worked in music from the games and it would have been really good, but they don't really do that. The CG is also, generally speaking, less jarring than it was in the first movie, because it is majority of the time Sonic and Tails and Knuckles, and they're all CG, and it's a CG environment. it looks better because they're not trying to blend the real world stuff with Sonic for the most part, and it looks fine. It looks really good. And there's definitely real sets that they use, mostly when Robotnik's on scene. They definitely do use a lot of real props and real real sets, which I liked. I appreciated that. You get a little bit of like real props and real scenery during the temple scenes, which looked really good actually. Overall, if I had to summarize it, I would say if you enjoyed the first movie, you're going to enjoy this one because it's basically more of the same in terms of the humor and the action and the overall structure. But if you didn't like the first movie because it didn't have enough of the stuff of the games, or the characters weren't really like the game characters, or because it was basically barely a Sonic movie, you'll probably like this one more because it is definitely closer to the games in the aesthetic and the overall plot and structure. The characters a little bit closer. Not 100%, admittedly, but it's close enough where you can tell they're trying. It seems like they took most of the criticisms of the first movie and how it handled the characters and the setting, most of that to heart, because there's definitely a lot of course correction with how the characters are handled, how the setting is handled, everything related to the game-related stuff and the lore. And other than the aforementioned stuff with the human characters being god-fucking awful, you mostly escape a lot of the failings that the first movie had. So it's definitely closer to being actually. I would definitely say that it's unironically the best video game movie. If we're counting ironic factor, though, I still like Mortal Kombat 1 better, but that's the debate for another day. It is definitely, speaking on terms of an objective level, the best video game movie so far. But it's still not perfect. There's still issues that it has, and it's mostly escaped from the issues of the first movie, and it's definitely become more of a Sonic movie. It is definitely a Sonic movie this time, unlike the first one, which was just action-adventure comedy featuring a character named Sonic the Hedgehog. So if you're more of a fan of the games or the comics, you'll enjoy this more. But if you like the first movie just as it is, you'll still be fine. So it's definitely better. Not significantly better. I would say it's like 10, maybe 15% better, because a lot of the human stuff is just so fucking bad. It drags it down so much. So because of that, it is a hard sell, but again, it's still a really good movie. I did enjoy it. I wasn't miserable, other than the one specific segment. I wasn't miserable watching it. So hopefully for the third one, because of course they've already announced that they're doing a third one, they finally learn what people want out of these fucking movies, and they make a good movie this time, like an 100% good movie this time. Because I think they've definitely learned most of what people want and most of what works, and they've definitely listened to people. Not enough, considering how quickly this movie entered production after the first movie came out. I think they announced it was coming out before the fucking movie even came out. The first one came out. So I don't know how much of it is just kind of left over from before they started getting criticisms of the first movie. So I don't necessarily know, but I hope they learn more from this movie about what people want and what people don't want. It's going to be interesting to see, because allegedly Jim Carrey said he was done. Granted, he said that on April Fool's, so who knows with him. Because he has a really weird fascination with Dr. Robotnik in this movie, just in general. He has a weird enjoyment of the character. So I kind of hope that he doesn't go away. I kind of hope that he sticks around, at the very least, for a third movie, and then we go from there. But I think he definitely doesn't carry this movie as hard as he did the first one, because everything around it, for the most part, is much better in comparison. So that's going to be it. Once again, way longer than I anticipated talking about this movie. My big project that I teased a little while back is going to take much longer than I was anticipating. So I'm probably gonna do one or two more mini episodes, not necessarily stuff like this, more like the April Fool's gag, more like my usual content before that comes out. So it's coming. It's gonna be soon, quote unquote. But otherwise, thank you for sticking around throughout all this rambling bullshit if you did, and I appreciate it. Thank you.